Hi everyone, I'm John Renney from Boneyard Pictures. Thanks for joining me. If you are a regular here who haunts the Boneyard, you'll know by now that filmmaker George Andrew Romero is an inspiration to me, and his work in the horror genre, in my eyes, is revolutionary to say the very least. The way that man carved out his own place in the hearts of genre fans the world over, with sheer hard work and a passion to tell his stories his way, is a true tale of realizing your dreams. This episode, I want to take a look at his fourth feature that was a significant point in his career and also one heck of a dark comment about our society. So please join me as we take a look at Romero's 1973 infection movie,
The Crazies.
By 1973, Romero was in $500,000 worth of debt as he was struggling to make another successful movie after his outstanding debut feature, Night of the Living Dead. Before The Crazies, he had made two other failed attempts at hits. With his dark and comedic drama, There's Always Vanilla.
I have to tell you, this is whether you put this on camera or not, it was an awful experience. I have very little recollection of what went on during the production of that film, and I care very little about it.
And his tale of a woman's oppression in Season of the Witch.
You know, you just keep learning how to move the eye and how to do things, and this was very early film for me. I just had a knowledge of basic technique, but I was really still experimenting with style.
Low-budget film producer Lee Hessel, who was mostly known for his adult films and had helped to try and release some of Romero's previous works, asked Romero if he had anything that he could go into production with for a budget of around $200,000, as Hessel wanted to try and make a more mainstream film and test the waters outside of adult entertainment.
So how did you get connected with George Romero?
I don't remember how I ran into him, but I'm sorry I did because I lost money on and I even changed the title. I had to change the campaign, the trailers, the one-sheets, you know, all the advertising.
Because they all had the old name?
Yeah, they had the old name.
A co-worker of Romero's, Paul McCullough, had written a screenplay titled The Mad People, and Romero saw some promise in this work, and Hessel acquired the rights. In interviews, Romero has said that the story remains McCullough's, and he is credited in the titles of The Crazies, but only the first few pages were kept, and the rest was completely rewritten for budgetary and marketing reasons by Romero himself. As a side note, McCullough went on to make the film Midnight with Night of the Living Dead co-creator John Russo, but that's a whole other video that I definitely want to make one day. That film is great.
I thought I saw shoes sticking out from under that blanket.
Nah, he was just a big farmer with a bundle.
Romero has often said that his movies are clear representations of his own left-leaning politics. And to look at his work, you can clearly see that most of his films have some iteration of Romero's views on society in them, and The Crazies is no exception. In the world of 1973, the hippie dream was well over. America was losing the war in Vietnam, and politicians like Tricky Dicky Richard Nixon had lied to the public about his involvement in Watergate, and internal spying programs, such as COINTELPRO, were revealed. COINTELPRO was a precursor to today's criminal misuse of public data. And because of these reasons, the public and the youth movement were protesting against their governments because of their distrust in authority figures, institutions, and military actions. And personally, I think The Crazies is Romero's most rebellious statement against corrupt governments and military operations all over the world. There is one scene in particular when a priest sets himself on fire in protest to the military raiding his church and manhandling the parishioners. And this is a horrific reflection of the true-life Buddhist monk Thi Quang Duc, who in protest of the treatment of Buddhists in South Vietnam, burned himself alive in 1963. The Crazies, for me, has always remained one of Romero's most political and personal statements that he committed to celluloid.
Give the loose taste to Harry. 20. Fantastic.
In brief, the story of The Crazies is about a military aircraft that crashes, and it allows harmful agents of a biological weapon named Trixie to leak into the water supply of a small American town.
If they can't hold that perimeter, we're looking at the possibility of Trixie spreading across the entire country. You break that perimeter, then we gotta drop the bomb. Like immediately.
The effects of the weapon drive the infected inhabitants into a murderous craze, and the townspeople slowly slip into insanity.
Ma'am?
Hello.
I'm bleeding bad. I'm bleeding.
The military and National Guard are brought in to handle the cleanup, but their methods are sloppy, uncaring, and violent. So a small band of infected and uninfected townspeople band together, led by our hero, an ex-Green Beret, to try and escape the madness.
We have you spotted. We're in communication with the Jeeps. We're in communication with the ground troops. You can't...
There are many elements in The Crazies that make this movie an astounding accomplishment for the small budget. They ended up coming to around $270,000. The film includes complex action scenes with what seem to be massive crowds, and Romero's kinetic, fast cutting to the soundtrack of a military drum drives the visual elements forward at breakneck pace. Romero makes use of every frame of film that he has. On the film's editing, Romero has said that his coverage was unconventional in his early days, as he was still learning how to be a filmmaker. In many cases, he chose not to shoot a master shot or wide of the scenes at all, but instead, he shot many angles in order to give himself as much flexibility in the edit as possible. Romero famously once saying, "Give me 100 bad shots over 3 good ones any day, and I can make anything work." Romero was a great editor, and his experience in commercial and short filmmaking allowed him to experiment on The Crazies, with a still humble but greater budget than he was used to. And I think that this is what makes The Crazies a very important and watershed moment in his career. He was learning on the job, and it was a step up and a much larger canvas for him to experiment with. And in the film you can clearly see that he was experimenting with skills and techniques that he would go on to use in his future films.
I don't know what my fans today will take from them. I mean, maybe they'll see a little bit of my style. Maybe they'll see a little bit of my head in there.
Romero's experimentation on this work in his early films is most certainly what prepared him to be ready when he was finally given over $1 million to work with on his most remembered films, such as Dawn of the Dead, Creepshow, and Day of the Dead. And in my own personal opinion, as a film lecturer and student of film, The Crazies shows us a film that is driven forward by the amazing talents of this up-and-coming filmmaker in 1973. And if we look past the problems with the low budget, a work like this can teach us multitudes about expert, low-budget filmmaking techniques.
All of a sudden you can't tell anymore who's legitimately crazy, infected by this germ, and who is just reacting, reacting, and in some cases reacting quite normally, fighting back. That's what it was, and that's really what my idea in doing all of this was.
Because of the time this movie was made in 1973, I think it's impossible not to draw parallels with real-world military action taken by the US in Vietnam and the internal conflict in America. As with the 1960s, the early 1970s was a time filled with violent protest against social injustice and human rights, and especially the killing of the Vietnam War protesters at Kent State University in 1970, when 4 student protesters were shot and killed and many were wounded by the American military. The handling of the disease and townspeople in The Crazies is vicious and eventually careless, when not only 1 but 2 possible cures are destroyed or unnoticed as a result of military and governmental incompetence. Personally, I believe these parallels are what make this movie one of Romero's most personal statements about his own political views and his own way of waging heavy peace by using film to make a political statement about the nation's distrust of the governing institutions, and not just Romero, but the whole world's fear of how easily we could all lose our personal freedoms if we do not fight the establishment's decisions.
Oh, come on, Frank. This is a highly organized, riot-trained army.
You can't tell me that they're unable to hold the perimeter on a small town through early morning.
Romero once said in an interview that he thought of the zombies in his most popular films as a natural disaster, like that of an earthquake or a flood, a natural disaster that threatens the natural order of things. And this is exactly how the gas mask wearing military appear in The Crazies. They are a constant threat to our heroes' freedom, and that drives the narrative forward. And one by one, as the horror continues, our main characters begin to lose their sanity and their lives to these faceless, unknown killers. Reading modern reviews of the film online, a lot of them seem to say the same thing, and that is that there are many technical flaws in The Crazies. Eye lines don't seem to match, and some of the performances from non-actors are passable, but not great, and I have to agree. The limitations of the budget and inexperience of the filmmakers do show at times. But in my opinion, this is part of what makes this film so important in Romero's canon of work. We can see the flaws, yes, but we can also see the great genre filmmaker being born and his skills being put to the test for the first time here. And boy, did he show us that he was here to stick around. To make this movie for $270,000 is incredible. There is a reason why Romero is a genre favorite and has fans like us, and that is because the man is a mountain of talent that shaped his own career through hard work. After The Crazies wrapped, Romero would spend some time in hospital partly due to exhaustion that he had suffered from his relentless schedule and trying to make this movie work, but of course also the stress of his financial situation. And that shows how seriously Romero took his life's work.
As soon as the film walked in the door, I'd sit there until it was edited. And I would sit there, sometimes 36, 48 hours. I basically lived there, and I just lived, breathed, and drank the stuff. No thought for family or whatever. I just was making movies, man.
It was Romero's talent and the fact that the man had a message that he wanted to portray in his work that I think makes his work appeal to new generations of film fans as the years pass by. And The Crazies is a time capsule of the political state of the world at the time, but also something for our generation to keep in mind.
Tell me what this is all about, maybe I'll cooperate with you.
If we look at the state of the world today, we have many internal wars and governmental actions that the whole world is now questioning. We have protesters being jailed, and here in the UK, the government was really recently trying to change protest laws to take away more of our personal freedoms. And to say that The Crazies is prophetic is an understatement. And today we live in a world where an incident like The Crazies doesn't seem to be that far-fetched if we hold a mirror up to today's society. In The Crazies, in 1973, George A. Romero really had something to say, and I think that makes this movie a timeless classic. Thanks for watching my take on The Crazies. If you would like to hear more from me about Romero's work and indeed the fantastic remake of The Crazies, please remember to like and subscribe. Let me know what you think about this work in the comments below, and as always, thanks so much for listening.